Scientific research has shown that there is a muscle that elite sprinters have that is 45% bigger than the average athlete. That muscle is the gluteus maximus. And since research has also shown that there is 44 to 45% variability in performance based on the size of your glute max, that means we need to train our glutes to be strong and big if we want to become more athletic. So in this video, I'm going to show you what exercises you should be doing to improve your glute strength, how to do them, and why if you skip these exercises, you probably won't become an elite athlete. Make sure you watch until the end of the video to get sets and reps for every exercise. The biggest ego lift in either bodybuilding or powerlifting is probably the squat or the bench press. Honestly, if you have the biggest squat or bench press in your gym, you are known to have the biggest chutzpah out there known to man. So this leads to bodybuilders and powerlifters over focusing on these type of exercises and eventually getting to the point where they're lifting with incorrect form just to have the biggest chutzpah. And for athletes, this lift isn't the squat or the bench press. This lift is actually the hip thrust. So I'm gonna give you a simple progression for the hip thrust and some other exercises you can do instead of the hip thrust to get the most strength and power gains in the glutes possible. This is gonna be our simple progression for the hip thrust variation. This is really important because you still need a lot of activation in your glutes for max velocity and especially in your acceleration. So what we're gonna do if you're a beginner, and even if you feel like your hip thrust isn't really helping your glutes, maybe you feel in your lower back, what we wanna start off with is this simple hip bridge and then raise one leg off the ground. We're gonna hold this position for around 30 to 45 seconds. So it's called a single leg glute isometric. This is a yielding isometric now. Now, what's really important about this is that we're digging this big toe, so your first toe, your big toe, into the ground as hard as possible. And we want full tripod while we're on the ground. So this is gonna be all 3 points, which is the pinky toe, the big toe, and around the heel for the 3 points of your tripod. Now we want a straight line from the knee all the way through the torso. We don't want hyperextension of the low back. We want a straight neutral spine, and you can let your head hang, but usually I like to tuck it in as much as possible and just keep it very, very relaxed right here. It's important to start off with isometrics because you're going to reduce compensations and improve something called motor unit recruitment and also mind-muscle connection, which is all very important for your glute because really the most important thing is to be able to access the glute while sprinting. If you can't feel it, you can't access it, then all the strength in the world is not gonna really matter. So once you could do an isometric hold for about a minute long and with good form without that extension of that low back, then the next part we're gonna get into is going to be a single leg rapid. So it's gonna be a little bit more crazy, but the goal is to drop as fast as possible, kind of like a fast eccentric, right? There's not gonna be the most tension in the glute at this bottom position, but we want to explode like a ballistic lift, right? You can even kick this foot up. I've seen a lot of people do that. God damn, these airplanes are annoying. You can even kick this foot up and get this position, but we want to remember we're not extending at the low back. We're just gonna go right here. Once you feel that glute lock out, you can stop. You wanna be as rapid as possible to improve rate of force development with the glute, especially on a single leg where there's gonna be less compensations. The next step, once you're doing the single leg rapids, is we're gonna load the single leg position. And we wanna start off with dumbbells, right? Before we get into the barbell hip thrust. And now we're here, and honestly, we can even bring it back to isometric, where we're holding this position for 20 to 40 seconds, even 45 seconds with this dumbbell on our hips, right? So kind of like a barbell hip thrust where you're holding it, but now we're just stabilizing and holding this position with some load. And then once again, we don't have to do fast rapids, but we can start doing normal controlled tempoed reps with this hip thrust with the dumbbell. That's gonna be my favorite way before we move into the barbell hip thrust. Now, like I said, this isn't my favorite variation, and I can always do a video on the top 2 glute exercises for athletes. But for now, a lot of people like the hip thrust. So the best way we can do it is just basic 2-point stance, or just forward right here. And then we have, our lats into the barbell, and we're extending, and still same point of contact, we're digging a big toe into the ground. We have a full tripod. We're not extending at the low back for extra range of motion. If your range of motion is right here, it's right here, right? Maybe lower the weight, but it's probably right here. And you want to dig in your chin and then lower. And then we can eventually get to a point where we're doing rapids. And you can even do single leg with this too. But there are some different stances you could do. I've seen some people do, and this one's not bad either, is athletic stance, where you're right here and your toes are out. This athletic stance can be really, really important, where you can kind of extend like a sumo, and you can even do quarter rapids where you're doing 1/4 range of motion and you're just exploding at extension, right? I've seen a lot of people do this, and that's not a bad one either. It's really important to have the right bench height for this, or else you're gonna be kind of like me where I can't do a full range of motion correctly, because this bench is a little bit too tall. But either way, I'm not the biggest fan of the hip thrust. I'd rather do the single leg and the rapid. But I have one more exercise for you that I've talked about in a lot of my videos. I think is one of the best exercises for building your glutes for strength and power. And this will be time and time again, the rear foot elevated split squat. All right, you can do a lot of things with this movement. You just go through a full range of motion, right? This is gonna be one of the biggest stretches on the glute. So you're putting through a full range of motion, which is lengthening the movement on the eccentric, and then you're actually pressing the movement concentrically. So you're putting it through a better range of motion than I would say in the hip thrust. But what's really cool is that you could play with the shin. We've talked about this before, where if you're going vertical shin, so think about this shin right here. If it's vertical at the bottom position, this is more glute and it's gonna be more sprint dominant. But then you can also play with it and make it more quad dominant and go knee over toe. And it's gonna be more acceleration dominant and 2-foot jumping for basketball, right? But what's even better than just those things that I've talked about in the past is you can do an isometric here at the bottom position where we're holding this position when the glute is the most lengthened, and we could play around with leaning forward, being more vertical, and play around with the torso however we want, and even the shin, to get the goals that we want. So this is always gonna be probably my favorite exercise for building strength in the glute, because you can also do rapids, you can do speed, where I'm literally dropping like here, and we're bouncing off as fast as possible, some oscillation work, and that's gonna get you really, really good results. And then what I was doing here was, I was doing the kettlebell position or the front squat position. We're getting a vertical torso. That vertical torso is really, really important for very short athletes because you need that vertical torso. But what if you're, maybe a little more advanced and you don't need to train that? Then we could do 1 dumbbell or 2 dumbbells. We're going side to side and we're going through this full range of motion. And obviously I'm at the point where I'm doing a barbell and I'm doing, 225 pounds, do a full range of motion. But because of the bilateral deficit, you're pretty much loading each leg with 200, 300 pounds. But it's not the same as doing a 2-foot squat where you're doing 500 pounds. That's not all gonna go to the legs. You're gonna get a lot of low back. But here you're getting a full range of motion, pure strength movement with no compensations because you're doing it on one leg with dumbbells and eventually progressing up to a Smith machine. And then for me, I do the open trap bar as pretty much the best option. So the first variation I would start off is 3 to 4 sets of 4 to 6 reps, or you can go up to 8 reps here with isometric holds with the front squat position. And then eventually you're gonna do dumbbells like that as well. And then once you're done with that, you wanna go to the barbell and Smith machine position. We're doing quarters or half range of motion for explosive power. That's gonna give you the most benefit for your glutes in terms of power. Now that you have very strong glutes and you're ready to transform your athleticism, there's one issue you still have. If you have strong glutes, but there's not good connection to the ankle, then you're not going to be athletic. So make sure you watch this video right here to make sure you have a strong ankle and you have the best exercises to improve that athletic ability.